Tokyo, January 1945. The sky was a leaden gray. The smoke from thousands of smoldering factories mixed with the clouds, making it impossible to distinguish between clouds and the spreading destruction. Below ground, an empire that once dominated the Pacific trembled, waiting for the final storm. The sound of metal clashing echoed dryly in the command bunkers. On the table, a map was spread out, marked with small red flags, each flag representing a loss, a piece of the nation's blood. The Japanese generals were silent, sweat soaking their thick collars. General Anami Korochika looked around, his voice hoarse. Report on the losses of Squadron 343. A young officer stood at attention. Sir, 17 more Zeros lost. Pilots, only 4 survived. Anami was silent. He knew that every plane lost was a drop of the nation's blood. But in the command bunker, no one dared to say that Japan was losing. The radio crackled throughout Tokyo. The announcer's voice was grave. A message from the Emperor. All people of Die Not, keep up the spirit of the kamikaze. Even if the enemy sets foot on our homeland, the will of Yamato will never be defeated. On the street, people stopped, looking up at the ash-covered sky. A middle-aged woman held her skinny child, her eyes looking up at the smoky sky. The child asked softly, "Mother, will the Shin'es save us?" The mother was silent. She herself no longer believed it. Thousands of kilometers away, at the North Airport, hundreds of B-29s lined up, preparing to take off. The night sky was quiet. The sound of Wright R-33 50 engines starting up like hundreds of growling monsters. Colonel Thomas Sweeney, the squadron commander, whispered to his comrades beside him, "Tonight, Tokyo will see the light of day." Little did they know that across the ocean, in their bunkers, Japanese soldiers still believed the Americans are afraid of death. They have no spirit to set foot on Japanese soil. The biggest difference between the two countries at this time was no longer belief, but numbers. America had more than 300,000 planes. Japan had less than 5,000. America had oil, steel, wheat, electricity, and factories that never stopped. Japan, only empty propaganda. But for the generals who believed in the Yamato spirit, the truth was still taboo. Major General Hayashi stood up bravely. "Sir, if we don't negotiate now, Tokyo will be wiped out. I propose opening a channel with the Soviet Union, asking for peace before it's too late." The room was dead silent. An officer banged his fist on the table. "Shut up! Talking about surrendering to the Emperor is treason." Anami closed his eyes and sighed. He knew Hayashi was right, but in the empire of glory and death, no one dared to tell the truth. The alarm bell still rang every day. People dug tunnels, removed roofs to avoid fires, hid children in abandoned subway lines. Trains carrying black-painted coffins ran all night. No one knew who was inside. In a classroom, a teacher lectured the students. "If America attacks, you must use spears, kitchen knives, anything that can kill the enemy." A boy raised his hand. "Teacher, if they have planes and we only have bamboo and wood, then we will die like the Japanese." The teacher replied, his voice trembling. "War is no longer about winning or losing, but about dying with honor." It was the most cruel psychological trap that militarism had ever created. At night, Hayashi sat in front of a world map marking the red zones, the places Japan had lost. The Philippines, Saipan, Guam, Iwo Jima. Each red mark was a pain. He wrote in his diary, "If the spirit was strong enough to win, we would have won long ago. But will cannot make oil. Faith cannot replace steel." The oil lamp flickered. Outside, the sound of B-29 engines approached. The Enola's wing squadron crossed the night sea. The moonlight reflected on the shiny aluminum fuselage. Co-pilot reported, "Radar has detected a few weak spots. Japanese anti-aircraft guns." Sweeney sneered. "They're still fighting the ghosts." On the ground, anti-aircraft guns fired only a few scattered flashes. A shell exploded hundreds of meters away, missing any planes. Tokyo was plunged into darkness. The sky was opening. Tokyo's last peaceful night. A proud capital still believed itself invincible, and an entire nation still believed that will could overcome machine. In the bunker, Hayashi heard the long whistle, the signal for the coming air raid. He stood up, looked at the family photo on the table. His wife and 3-year-old son smiled. He whispered, "If I die, tell my child that I believe Japan could be immortal." He straightened his uniform and stepped out into the dark hallway. Flashing lights, the sound of B-29 engines echoed through the sky. Sometimes an empire doesn't fall because it was defeated, but because it believed in a dream that wasn't real. That night, Tokyo was moonless. In the distance, 334 B-29s carrying bombs approached the city. General Curtis LeMay ordered, "Reduce altitude, burn Tokyo to the ground." A mother folded her child's clothes. The child asked, "Mommy, will I still go to school tomorrow?" The mother smiled. "If there is school, I will go." Those words were as light as the wind, but this was also the last time the child heard her voice. In B-29 Bay, 8621, Captain Robert Tanner looked at the altimeter, 1,800 meters. The radio operator, "Gentlemen, it's time to open the gates." The bomb hatch opened. Hundreds of M69 bombs fell like a rain of fire, each one containing solid napalm exploding when it hit the ground at a temperature of more than 1,000 degrees Celsius. The Americans did not bomb the factory precisely, but aimed at the residents. Every house made of wood, bamboo, and paper became the perfect fuel. Tokyo turned into the largest incinerator ever seen. Wind howled, bombs exploded, roofs flew off, alleys formed a whirlwind of fire heading towards the center. People ran, but the fire ran faster. A survivor recounted, "We ran to the Sumida River. The water was boiling. People jumped in, but could not get up. Old people, children hugged each other, kneeling in the middle of the street. The fire did not distinguish between people. There were only screams and then silence." Anami looked at the red map of Tokyo. The officer reported, "The enemy lowered their altitude. They are not afraid of anti-aircraft artillery." "Where are our artillery?" "There are no more bullets, sir." Anami clenched his fists. His eyes were cloudy. He whispered, "This is no longer war. This is divine retribution." Fires spread through the neighborhoods. Mothers rushed out the doors with their children in their arms. Walls collapsed, flames cut through the streets, leaving everything behind, only the sound of wind howling through the burning city. In 6 hours, 41 square kilometers of Tokyo disappeared. More than 100,000 people died. 1 million were left homeless. No city in history had ever burned like this, not because of hatred, but because of technology. LeMay stood in front of the map, smoking a cigar. Tokyo destroyed 70%, no significant anti-aircraft damage. Next is Osaka. No applause, no cheers, just cold statistics. Industrial warfare, when death becomes routine. The alarm bells rang again. People ran to the basement, but the basement was only a meter deep. The B-29s continued bombing. Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya, every city, every night, burned like a giant lamp illuminating the sky of Japan. An American pilot wrote in his diary, "From an altitude of 1,500 meters, I saw a city explode like a starry sky. No people, only light." Anami, Umezu, and the Minister of War held an emergency meeting. The American reconnaissance images, Tokyo had turned to ashes. Hayashi stood up. "We can no longer fight with spirit. The enemy does not use guns, they use production." A general shouted, "The Yamato spirit is unyielding. America cannot endure losses for long." Hayashi pounded the table. "What losses? They have lost nothing. They produce 2,000 more planes while we lose 200 a week. This is no longer a war, it is a production problem." The room was silent, only the distant sound of bombs. Tokyo was still burning. By June, more than 60 Japanese cities had been bombed. 300,000 people had died. Half of the industrial infrastructure had been destroyed. But in the eyes of the Japanese military, it was not yet lost. They believed that as long as the people had the spirit to fight, Japan had not yet lost. People sat around oil lamps. An old man said, "They said we would fight the last battle in our homeland." A young girl asked, "The last battle? Then what?" No one answered. Snow fell into the hot ashes. LeMay wrote in his diary, "They still won't surrender. Maybe we should show them the sky can burn." On the table, a file marked Project Manhattan. LeMay looked at it, silent. If the fire doesn't stop them, maybe the sun will. Tokyo was still choking with smoke and ash, rubble dominating every street. Survivors wandered in the darkness, searching for what was left. But before them was an undeniable reality. War was no longer a confrontation between brave spirits, but between machines, production, and numbers. Across the Pacific, B-29s continued to take off from Tinian and Saipan, each plane weighing tens of tons, loaded with firebombs and M69 napalm, ready to turn Tokyo into a sea of fire. Colonel Thomas Sweeney stood in the command cabin, his voice low. "There's no time. We're not just bombing them. We're teaching them a lesson they'll never forget. The Tokyo sky was ablaze under the pale moonlight. Bombs fell, exploding violently, spreading throughout the residential areas. Fire burned deep into every bamboo roof, every small alley, every commercial center. People ran in all directions, but the fire ran faster, engulfing streets, parks, children, and the elderly. In the command bunker, Major General Hayashi stood still, looking at the red map of Tokyo, sweating profusely. He muttered, "We have no choice. Spirit cannot overcome the power of production. They do not fight, they destroy, with machines and industry." General Anami looked out the bunker window, where the flames were blazing, burning the entire city red. He sighed, his heart heavy. "We have believed in a dream for too long, and that dream is burning us." Meanwhile, at sea, the Japanese fleet prepared for the final battle, the decisive confrontation at Okinawa. The Yamato fleet, the symbol of Japanese power and spirit, 263 meters long, weighing 72,000 tons, slowly made its way into the deep sea. On deck, officers and sailors watched the American patrols approaching in the distance. Captain Hiroshi Nakamura recorded in his diary, "We set sail as if to meet death. No fear, just a clear awareness of what was coming. American reconnaissance aircraft spotted the Yamato fleet. Within hours, more than 300 American aircraft, including F-6F Hellcats, SB-2C Helldivers, and TBM Avengers, took off, preparing to attack. The sky over Okinawa became chaotic. Bombs and torpedoes fell like rain, breaking all order, all defensive tactics. Yamato fired 2 giant 46-centimeter cannons, but each shot was like a thunderclap in the red sky. The American forces continued to charge forward, undeterred. The Japanese sailors looked at each other. No one dared to step out onto the deck. Death was approaching, but not with conventional guns and bullets, but with industrial power, with bombs raining down from the sky. The Japanese battleships began to list, compartments flooded, fires spread rapidly on the deck. Captain Nakamura wrote, "We saw our comrades torn apart by the blast wave. Yamato exploded compartment by compartment, people falling into the sea." The storm of smoke and fire turned the sea crimson. More than 3,000 sailors lost their lives, with only about 280 surviving. Yamato, the symbol of morale, was completely destroyed. Brigadier General Buckner remarked, "We have not only won the naval battle, we have shattered the belief that Japan can stand against the United States." Back in Tokyo, the bombs were still falling. Survivors sat around oil lamps, sighing and crying silently. The Japanese generals held an emergency meeting, and Hayashi repeated his warning. "We can no longer win by spirit. America does not fight with men. It fights with production." The remaining Japanese newspapers printed the news. Cities like Osaka, Kobe, Nagoya were burning night after night, creating continuous seas of fire. The Americans did not need tactics, did not need fighting spirit, only industry and superior firepower. In the countryside, civilians were panicking. A boy looked up at the dark sky and asked his father, "Dad, is our country still here?" The father could only hug his son and cry silently. Japan had witnessed its spirit and faith crushed under the unimaginable power of American industry. In the command bunker, Anami closed his eyes, touching the red-marked map of Tokyo. The image of ashes and fire appeared in his memory. He whispered, "We have died since we believed in the impossible dream." In the sky, B-29s continued to drop bombs. This time, the targets were the remaining industry, fuel depots, and transportation centers, but civilians still suffered heavily. Each raid was a testament to the principle that industrial might, not individual spirit or courage, determines victory. American pilots recorded in their diaries, "We saw entire cities disappear in flames. There was no sign of life, only light and smoke." Hayashi and the Japanese generals realized that spirit could not overcome matter. Even surrender had become taboo, but now civilian survival became the only priority. The Battle of Okinawa, the destruction of Yamato, and the air raids on Tokyo were only the prelude to the tragic end that lay ahead. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the Emperor's final decision. The Japanese, from the capital to the battlefield, had entered a phase where war was no longer about honor, but about about survival. The Yamato spirit, the belief in victory, was now just ashes blowing in the wind. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Tinian Air Base rang with the sound of B-29 engines. The Enola Gay, commanded by Paul Tibbets, carried Little Boy, the first atomic bomb used in war. The pilots and crew knew that this time they would change history. Tokyo and Osaka had already been reduced to seas of fire, but today the American target was another symbol: Hiroshima, a large industrial city, a military center, and a densely populated city. On deck, the pilots looked down through their telescopes, feeling both excitement and fear. Tibbets wrote in his diary, "We were trained to drop the bomb and return safely, but in our hearts, we knew that no one on Earth had ever seen such power. In Hiroshima, people were still unaware of the impending disaster. They prepared for a normal morning. Cafes opened, children went to school, workers went to factories. A teacher looked out the window. Tomorrow we will continue our work. No one knows that the world is about to change." 8:15 a.m. Little Boy left the Enola Gay. A blinding white light like two suns shone straight down on the ground. In an instant, everything changed. The temperature soared, spreading through every roof, every street, every person. Fire engulfed everything. Captain Yamamoto Hiroshi, a survivor of Yamato, watched from afar. We saw the light, then the feeling of heat spread throughout our bodies. The city disappeared in a red-white smoke as if the earth had been torn apart. Tens of thousands died instantly. The survivors suffered severe burns, losing their families, homes, and futures. The Americans from above recorded in their diaries, "The city burned like a field of stars. There was no sign of life, only light and smoke." Just 3 days later, on August 9th, Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. The same scenario repeated itself. A city that had disappeared in minutes. Fire, smoke, screams, and terror filled the streets. A Japanese soldier recorded, "We have never seen such power. This is no longer war, but absolute destruction." In the palace, Emperor Hirohito summoned his generals. The military advisors still wanted to continue the war, but the reality was clear. Japan could no longer resist the atomic power and industrial might of the United States. He looked at a map of the destroyed cities and said in a low voice, "We will surrender to save the survivors." On August 15th, over the radio, yes, the emperor read a historic statement. "We will accept the Potsdam terms. The war is over." People cried, applauded, but were also in shock. More than 6 years of war ended, leaving behind millions of dead, cities flattened, and painful memories that could not be erased. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Okinawa all became maps of tragedy and lessons of atomic power. American pilots, Japanese sailors, and civilians all wrote in their diaries, "We survived, but the world was no longer ours." The decision to surrender not only ended the war militarily, but also opened a new era. The world had to face nuclear power and its unprecedented consequences. American analysts later commented, victory was not just due to tactics or fighting spirit, but due to industrial capacity, weapons production, and science. Atomic bombs, B-29s, huge supply chains, all created the physical and psychological pressure that forced Japan to surrender. Japanese survivors recalled, "We lost everything, but survival was a miracle." The Americans also recorded, "We won, but the price was too high." August 15th, 1945, marked not only the end of World War II in the Pacific, but also demonstrated a principle. In the 20th century, industrial and scientific power determined national destiny, not individual spirit or courage. On August 16th, 1945, Japan was engulfed in ashes and horror. Once bustling cities were reduced to rubble. Tokyo, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Osaka, all are etched in the memories of survivors. People moved cautiously along the barren streets. The buildings that remained standing were nothing but charred iron frames and concrete. Many families lost everything: homes, loved ones, livelihoods. Children wandered, searching for food, water, and safety in the rubble. In Hiroshima, survivors suffered severe burns and lacked food and medicine. A doctor recorded in his diary, "We couldn't save them all. Hospitals were overwhelmed. The dead lay next to the living. Everyone was in despair. The pain was indescribable." In Nagasaki, the scene was similar. Rubble, bodies strewn about, smoke, and the smell of burning. A young girl wrote in her diary, "We saw light and fire, then everything disappeared. I lost my parents, my house, my school. Only my brother and I remained." Although the war was over, the Japanese people could not believe that they had actually survived. They faced hunger, disease, loss, and spiritual despair. Millions took refuge in the countryside, living in makeshift shelters. The United States quickly deployed its occupation forces. Supreme Leader Douglas MacArthur entered Japan as the nation's de facto leader. He issued instructions to control the military, restore order, and investigate the damage. Japan, a country once proud of its Bushido spirit, was now occupied. Reforms began. The Japanese government was dissolved, the army was disbanded, and a new constitution was promulgated in 1947. MacArthur focused on government restructuring, abolishing military power, developing democracy, social reform, reducing feudal power, promoting equality in education, economic recovery, rebuilding infrastructure, developing civilian industry instead of military. People witnessed the U.S. taking control at every step, from distributing food and medicine to opening schools, establishing local governments. Many initially hated the presence of the occupying forces, but gradually realized that only outside power could help them survive and start over. Personal stories recorded. An old man looked out at the blackened fields and sighed. "We lost everything, but at least we are alive." A schoolgirl recounted, students returned to school, but their books were gone, and the classrooms were nothing but concrete walls and floors. We had to study amid the rubble, but we wanted to live and learn. Americans who participated in the occupation also recorded diaries. One officer wrote, "Japan is a living example of industrial power and the destruction of war, but the people are resilient even though they have lost everything." An American engineer, "Restoring Japan is the greatest challenge ever. But this is an opportunity to teach them that peace is more valuable than war." Other post-war problems also emerged: hunger, disease, sabotage, and incurable mental anguish. But at the same time, a new generation of Japanese began to realize that the past was over. Education, media, and culture began to inculcate the message: war is a tragedy, peace is the ultimate value. By the end of 1945, Japan was still under American control, but steps were being taken to rebuild. Old roads began to be cleared, makeshift schools opened, and a part of the civilian economy began to revive. Later scholars assessed the American occupation was not just military control, but a social, economic, and political project to completely transform Japan. This process transformed a once proud and brutal empire into a modern, peaceful, and democratic nation. Yes, Kate. The Japanese people looked to the future from the ashes of war. They survived, learned to trust in outside help, and began to accept that the Yamato spirit could not prevail against modern industrial and scientific power. The year 1945 ended, but the legacy of the Pacific remained etched in every street, every family, and every memory that survived. Japan, from a proud empire, was now a nation that had to relearn the concept of peace and reconstruction. America, from the warriors in the B-29 squadrons, stepped into a new role as a superpower, with nuclear power as the foundation of global power. The Japanese people faced collective pain, more than 3 million dead, millions injured or homeless. The economy completely collapsed. The cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki became symbols not only of human destructive power, but also of the value of life in the modern industrial age. Scholars have argued that America's victory in World War II was not based solely on tactics or fighting spirit, but on superior industrial, scientific, and logistical strength. The system of mass production, the supply chain from raw materials to advanced weapons, and the ability to quickly apply new tactics created absolute superiority. The first lesson, material and scientific power determined the outcome of war. Japan, despite its indomitable warrior spirit, could not keep up with the United States' ability to produce and apply modern technology. Morale could not compensate for the lack of material, fuel, and weapons. The second lesson, modern warfare destroyed not only soldiers, but also civilians. Napalm and nuclear bombs did not discriminate. People, cities, cultures, and histories could all disappear in a matter of hours. The stories of survivors, from children to the elderly, reminded later generations that industrial warfare was no longer a confrontation between armies, but a total annihilation. The third lesson, psychological warfare and industrial power combined to create irresistible pressure. Modern powers overwhelm their enemies not only with numbers or tactics, but also with the ability to break their beliefs, morale, and will. Japan was eventually forced to surrender, not only because of physical destruction, but also because of the collapse of the morale of its military and population. During the occupation, the United States implemented political, social, and educational reforms that laid the foundation for modern Japan. The 1947 Constitution limited the military, empowered democracy, and made peace a central national value. Economic and social reforms transformed a devastated country into a powerful industrial economy a few decades later. The lessons of war also had a profound impact on global strategy. Countries realized that war in the 20th century had become a game of technology, industry, and logistics rather than one of honor or fighting spirit. Memories of 1945 remain in Japanese culture. Books, films, documentaries, and education emphasize peace, the devastation of war, and the role of modern technology. The international community also learned lessons about controlling weapons of mass destruction, the importance of diplomacy, and the value of lasting peace. A former US soldier recalled, "We won, but it was a heavy victory, and we saw the power of destruction and realized that peace is not just a temporary cessation of war, but an understanding of the value of life." A former Japanese civilian said, "We survived, but we lost everything." The lessons of 1945 taught us that spirit, courage, and faith are important, but they can never overcome the power of material and modern science. The Pacific War ended in peace, but the price paid was enormous. The United States and Japan, from fighting enemies to nations reshaping societies in a modern direction, show that industry and science determine victory or defeat in modern warfare. Psychology and spirit are challenged by superior material power. Peace is the most optimal strategic choice, but it is only realized after paying the price of lives and cities. The lesson of 1945 is still valuable for today's world. Material power, science, and technology determine destiny, but people must choose peace to avoid repeating disasters. History is more than just numbers and events. It's vital lessons about people, war, and peace. If you want to continue to discover the emotional stories and events that shape the world, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Don't miss any part of this history series, because each story is a valuable lesson for today and tomorrow.